Do you think immigration is a problem in your area? 2/3 of British people say no, not a problem at all. If you ask people, is immigration a problem nationally? 2/3 of people say, yes, it is. Actually, the truth is that we worry about it at this stage more than we need to. And if I may just make a point, coming back on what Douglas said, look, we've always been pretty good at this. Right from the very first Elizabeth, where there were all sorts of issues about Catholics coming into the country, she said, I will not make a window into the hearts and souls of men. Essentially, as long as you play by the rules, then everybody's welcome here, everybody contributes. And that's really been the way that we've always dealt with it, and that's why we are better at it than any other country, I would say, by the way, in the world.
David Frost, I'd like to get your thoughts on what both Srila Flather and Douglas Murray said about the effects of hiring both skilled and less skilled immigrant workers in this country, both on the skills base of British-born workers and indeed on the countries from which the skilled immigrants come, which may see some of their most talented people disappear.
Well, I think the first point is you can't talk about migration in isolation. You have to talk at the same time about the education system in this country and the welfare system. It's undoubtedly the case that in many parts of the country we have a welfare system that does not incentivize people to work. And that is why employers have been using migrants, because they have a stream of people who arrive at the factory door knocking on and saying, I'm prepared to work and I'm here ready to start now. I think that's the first one. The second is, on the education front, employers would say, you know, the deal with the state is that I pay my taxes and my employees pay their taxes for 11 years. And at the end of that, we expect young people to be able to, one, be able to read, second, to be able to write, and thirdly, have some work ethic. And there are far too many young people who don't have those skills. And therefore, again, I have a stream of migrants who are capable of doing that. So you have to tackle both, and the government has to keep its foot on the pedal with both welfare reform and education. Now, as regards drawing skills in from overseas, yes, I understand that it will be sucking out some nurses, for example, from Africa. But I would suggest that we live in a globalized world. We are moving goods and products around. We're moving services around the world every minute of every day. And I don't see why Labour, in a sense, should be any different from that.
Srila Flather, I'd like to just get you to explain what you meant when you spoke in your opening remarks about abuses of the immigration system. What were you thinking of?
I'm thinking about, I'll give you an example, which was given to me by actually somebody from the Ministry of Justice. There are Pakistanis who have 2 wives, both of whom they married in Pakistan, and they've been able to bring them here, and they're on benefits. I call that an abuse, because if you have, the marriages are made in Pakistan, and what is to stop them bringing 4? This is just one, but there are many abuses, especially on family reunification, and really that needs to be looked at. But I want to take issue with Trevor about him saying how the population is aging and there'll be a vacuum in Europe. Well, there won't be a vacuum in this country, because our population is due to rise, and it is rising. And if he will say, I'm now being an extremist, but half of the children born in 2009 were born to mothers born abroad.
But the fact is we are still below replacement level, which is 2.4. Our birth rate is something like 1.9 per woman. We're still a declining population.
Let me just ask Douglas Murray one question, then I'm going to come to the audience. Douglas, you talked about the need for a unifying theme in any cohesive society. Is it your contention that immigrants somehow dilute that unifying theme?
Well, absolutely, and particularly when you see not just immigration, but mass immigration, which is what this country has seen since.
And you talk about mass immigration, even having looked at the figures or heard the figures, which I outlined.
Mass immigration, hundreds of thousands of people going into a country in a year, of course, is by any standards mass immigration. And may I say, just quickly, this figure that's always trotted out about the Huguenots and Elizabeth I. The same number of Huguenots came to this country over a half-century as people come into this country in a couple of months now. Now, it's true that there is a level at which people can integrate swiftly and that society can absorb them. But I would contend, and I think there's a lot of evidence to say this, that if hundreds of thousands of people are coming in, there is no incentive to involve yourself in the society. That is why we see the situation we currently have with parallel communities. I mean, if you don't even have to leave London to see this, that there are communities in this country that are to all intents and purposes, transplanted direct. And I think that's a bad thing.
OK, let's get some questions from the floor now. Lots of people here with lots of points to make, I am sure. Raise your hands, wait for a microphone to reach you. Yes, there's a lady down there, and then there's a lady over on the other side. Yeah, you first.
Hi, my name is Casey Callista. And my question is, what effect do you believe the native religious population has on immigrant integration? For example, the American South versus England or France, especially considering immigrants from less developed countries tend to be more religious.
May I ask where you're from originally?
America.
Thank you. And one over here?
My name is Flaminia, and I'm from Goldsmiths University. How much of these concerns over immigrants are generated by economic concerns, and how much is fear generated by the media discourse?
OK, thanks. Let's get some answers to those first of all. Trevor Phillips, native religious population, how important a factor do you believe that to be?
Well, the impact of religion, this is controversial, but I would say, broadly speaking, it's beneficial. You have to bear in mind, of course, that British religiousness is quite different to anywhere else. I mean, in America, you have actual religion. What we have here is a sherry party called the Church of England. So it's not that difficult.
There are other religions here as well.
It's not that difficult to get on terms with it. But actually, 2 points. The revival of religious observance in this country has been led really dramatically by immigrant populations, particularly Africans and Filipino groups, who are particularly in the Catholic Church. And the second point I would make is that there's a lot of controversy often about faith schools. Well, actually, we did some work on this about 2 years ago, and what we discovered was that for specific reasons, the Church of England schools and Catholic schools in this country tend to be more ethnically diverse than the normal municipal state schools. And the reason for that is that they don't just draw from a single neighbourhood, they draw from a wider neighbourhood. And what that means is that actually these are the places quite often where in schools the most integration, the most sharing across the lines of ethnicity are taking place.
Douglas Murray, can I get you to respond to the second question, which is why you think there is concern about immigration levels? Is it more to do with economic concerns, fears about jobs and so on, or is it really fear engendered by media coverage of the issue?
No, I think it's too easy to pretend these issues aren't actually there, pretend that the media whips them up and so on. Let's say, take a recent celebrity in this matter, Mrs. Duffy. From Rochdale, who became famous when she spoke with Prime Minister Gordon Brown before the ex-Prime Minister Gordon Brown before the last election. Mrs. Duffy complained that, or mentioned that her sons and grandchildren couldn't get jobs because of migrants coming into the area. Now, I would say that's not the interesting thing. What is interesting was that the trigger response to that from somebody who should know better was to label that woman a bigot. In that, you see the problem, which is that people in this country are aware of what immigration has brought. They notice the advantages they've got from immigration, but they also notice that there are downsides. But the moment they mention any of those downsides, the political class and anyone else squashes down them and says, if you were even to raise that, you'd be a bigot. This is the problem. Now, I think that finally there's a very...
He didn't get re-elected.
Trevor Phillips.
Yeah, I don't think Gordon Brown... I think he didn't get re-elected for wrecking our economy till the end of time. I mean, I don't think it was directly the Mrs. Duffy case, but...
Do you acknowledge, though, Douglas Murray, that there has been a shift over the last maybe 12 months or so in the preparedness of leading politicians now to start tackling this issue?
No, because I think that the politicians are in a terrible mess over this one, because they think the moment you sense it with them, whenever you discuss this matter, in private or in public with politicians of any party, they behave as though they are treading on eggshells. Because to a very great extent they are. Whole political careers, magnificent political careers, could be wrecked in a second if they got this one wrong. The fact is that people need to have their concerns reflected by the political class, and they don't. Let me give you one very quick example, if I may, which was that in April of this year, just before the election, Labour government boasted of the number of jobs it had created in its 13-year period in office, and it turned that almost every one of the 1.67 million new jobs had gone to foreign-born workers. Now, if you were a British person who had not been born abroad, you should have the ability to discuss that in a way that does not bring your political class and often sections of your media class down on your head. These are utterly legitimate concerns.
Let's take another couple of questions. Gentleman over there.
Christian Story, King's College. First of all, I'd like to say that I couldn't agree with Douglas Murray more. My concern is regarding immigrants that don't integrate into the larger community, and therefore there's not as such a melting pot of immigration, but a volatile salad bowl, if you like. Our tolerance and liberalism has been exploited in certain places like Bradford, my city, to such an extent that the city is on the verge or knife edge of social and economic collapse. And this is partly because of the issue of the city rulers and the councillors and the police are not willing to deal with the issue for fear of being labelled racists. So my question would be, what do you think the future is for cities like Bradford?
Trevor Phillips, very simple question for you. What is the future for Bradford?
Bradford is a pretty successful city. Bradford's got a new city centre. I know there are issues, but there are issues in every city. And by the way, some of those issues in London are not brown or black, they're white. You stand outside the pub on Friday night or Saturday night in any city and you're going to find some difficulties. I do not think Bradford's a city on the verge of collapse, actually. I think financial services and so on there have changed it. Can I just make a very quick point about something else? Let's just stop having this debate as though we're still in the 1980s. Immigration is now an irreversible part of the world economy. The remittances business, people sending money back home, $450 billion every year, more than all of the flows of official aid. This is part of the new world we've just got to deal with. And here, I don't agree, Douglas. I mean, I don't know what world you're living in. Nobody can stop talking about immigration at the moment. There's not some dirty secret. Actually, what's happened is, it isn't carrying the same charge that used to when Enoch Powell made it into a purely racial debate. It is a question about economics, about social costs, about how we plan. So trying to recast this as though we were still having the same debate about race that we did in the 1970s, frankly, is a complete waste of time. It's a new world. Let's talk about it in that context.
Douglas Murray. Trevor, I mean, this exactly demonstrates the problem, doesn't it? I mean, there's a gentleman there who lives in Bradford and says that he experiences it as a very riven and torn society. You know, you, on a very substantial government salary and your large quango, get to
I was wondering when we were going to get to my salary.
Get to swan in and you'll be welcomed by all of the relevant faith leaders and all the sort of self-important people in the community who say they speak for the community and so on. And that's your experience of Britain. When you say which world do I live in, I live in the ordinary world of other people in Britain. But, I mean, if I can say so, yours is a very privileged view of this.
I think it's time for another question. There's a lady down here, and then there's a gentleman right at the back there. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Sue Wright, University of Portsmouth. I wanted to ask the panel what they think about citizenship testing. What do they think it's for? Do they think it's working?
OK, thank you for that. And the gentleman at the back there?
My name is Bruno Silva. I'm from Brunel University. I just wanted to pick up on Mr. Murray's points about the British culture and when the immigrants are coming in, they're not really getting a sense of what it's supposed to be like to be British. It's a culture which is always evolving. That's what makes the British culture such a good thing. At the same time, that's what people kind of see it as a negative.
OK, thanks for that. Douglas Murray, citizenship testing?
I think it's vital. It may be too late, but it's certainly something we should be doing pretty rigorously now. I mean, what the young gentleman just said gets very much to the core of the problem, because the British people are, I would submit, stuck between the following sort of statements. On the one hand, you have yourself saying, there's no such thing as British culture, and a lot of people feel that. A lot of people that feel that British identity...
Well, to be fair, that's not
so
exactly what he said. He said it's evolving all the time.
Sure, but that it's been so assailed that there's no such thing as British culture, as it were. That's the beauty of it. And then on the other hand, you have Trevor Phillips coming along and saying, if you have any of those old-fashioned concerns, you've just got to get with the modern beat about it, you're so last century, and so on. Actually, I don't think that is the case. I don't think it is an economic debate. I think it's one about identity, which people should be having. I agree